Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Jatin Patil, a student of XLRI's PGDM GM General Management Program. And today we have a very special guest with us, someone who's been at the forefront of business transformation and innovation for over 2 decades. I'm thrilled to welcome Mr. Shamindra Basu, partner at IBM Consulting and the leader of the Generative AI Practice in India.
Hi Jatin, pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you. Over his career, Shamindra has been part of some of its first of its kind transformation projects across consumer products and industrial sector, working closely with CXOs to shape and implement business strategy. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us here today, sir. So, before we jump into the generative AI practices and what your expertise is currently at, I would like to know where it all started and how you began this journey. So, can you take us back to where it all began and what drew you into consulting in its first place?
So I would say that probably my journey has been a little unconventional from how typical partnership journey has been in most people that I've worked with, because when I started my journey post my engineering, I wanted to be in the industry. And that's the time when I joined into Praxia, which was into cryogenics at that time. I spent a lot of time there. What is interesting in this whole journey, as I play it out, by the time I came into consulting, I think these were the foundational blocks and also defined a large part of what I did in consulting later on. For example, the time I spent in Praxia, beyond the chemical engineering and other engineering stuff, obviously I was playing an operations excellence role there. So my introduction into the entire process, Six Sigma, etc., happened quite early on, right? Post B school, obviously I went into FMCG and ITC, and there I was working with them in some of the largest supply chain projects, because they were also at a phase when they were migrating from their tobacco business to the FMCG business, and we were looking at merging the entire supply chain of these very disparate velocities of products and natures, right? And that set a foundation of the entire supply chain consulting that I really played out. But what happened during that tenure, Jatin, is that I realized, and it takes me back to a very interesting thing that one of my very early managers in Praxair told me, right? I think the point he made was that you should look at your career as a long journey in different stages, almost a 35 years of journey. And you have to choose till what point you are absorbing knowledge and energy. And where do you go and start just dissipate? Because when you start dissipating, beyond the time you will stop, because you are not absorbing anything, right? And that was something that used to obviously haunt me. And I realized that in many of the roles that I were playing, they were very repetitive at some point of time, and I was curious. I wanted to do new things, and I felt that one area which would have given me opportunity to keep being on the leading edge of what's happening in the industry was consulting, and that's where I made the move and joined IBM in the strategic consulting space. And from there, obviously, a lot of different roles played out.
I love how your journey has been very thoughtful, and at every step, it also shows me a vision of what I want my next 30 years to look like, and it's given me some insights. But we'll come to that soon. I would now like to know that once you joined IBM, you would have led several large-scale transformation processes, and a lot of your journey has been about you contemplating about, okay, you had mentioned that you're a curious person and how you can transform. So, keep learning. So, can you share one such experience that really, shaped your approach to consulting and, building large-scale projects for companies in terms of digital transformation or generative AI, whatever it is at IBM?
From one of the client examples.
Yeah.
Sure. I think, and I think there are some projects which define how you think about things in consulting, right? And every project is a learning. One that really stuck with me is that if you look at the classical strategy consulting, it's usually the typical 3-phase approach, right? The first phase is more of investigation, where you look at data, you look at creating certain hypotheses about, and let's pick an example just to make this more meaningful. Let's say we are trying to reduce stockouts in an industrial products company, right? So you start with some hypothesis in terms of these are possibly 15 hypotheses across the demand side, the supply side, the logistics side, which can possibly go wrong. And essentially you try to look at the process, the data, do investigation to justify amongst all the hypotheses that you put, which are actually validated. And then you look at redesign and so on and so forth, right? Roadmap, etc. Now, many people question that you have done this many times and your organization has done this many times. Why didn't you just start with redesign? What value do you add by doing an as is? Because fundamentally, you will find some fault and you will redesign. So why even waste this 6 weeks, 8 weeks, just unearthing and telling us that, guys, you are wrong in these places? What's important is that we were working with a very old chemicals company, very reputed business house. But obviously the processes were archaic, etc., and the users were old and they had been working in a certain way. What really taught me in that company when I was going through this entire phase is the reason we do that as is and the validation and hypothesis, not so much for us to tell them that these are the 10 things that are wrong. It is also to take your client stakeholders through that journey of discovery. Look, if we didn't do that and we would have just gone and told, guys, this is the end state that needs to be there because 10 other companies does it, is equally applicable for you, the acceptance of such recommendations is very low.
It feels less personalized.
It feels visible. But when they went with us through that whole journey and they discovered those gaps and they saw that, oh, in my operation, I never knew, I never thought this, I saw this data, I never analyzed the data in this way. That whole process that they went through in that as is actually made sure when we did the 2B, it was essentially cakewalk because they knew that these are the things that needs to be fixed. And at the bottom of the heart, all these people are passionate about their own company. Yes. Sometimes the reason they don't want to change is why they feel that this is the best way to do it. What you are telling me is not necessarily the best way, right? And hence they resist. And when they understand that there is a gap that needs to be sorted, the acceptance becomes much easier. So that was quite revealing for me of why you need to take your clients and partners and people along with you in that whole discovery process. The process itself is quite enlightening and revealing to make the other steps in the journey much easier.
Excellent, sir. I resonate the same feeling with what you're saying because as an engineer myself, we were taught how to be more solution oriented, frame a problem, try to find the solution. But as and when we've progressed to our journey at XLRI over here, we've seen our strategy professors and we have cases. Might not be real consulting this one, but we have cases where we read. And often the mistakes that we used to make in our first term used to be directly to come at answers, whereas our professors would spend about 15% of their time finding the answer and about 85% analyzing what the case is, how did it begin, and they draw the full value chain. And as you mentioned that your clients tend to realize, oh, this is a data we have never measured before. So I think that's a great insight, and that's something which I'm trying to pick up here as well.
Perfect.
That's wonderful, sir. So get to the main topic, which is the generative AI. It's reshaping organizations, and we've had several guest talks out here, and everyone mentions about Gen AI. So could you give us your quick input into what you're seeing in terms of the industry, how it's reshaping the industry?
I think first of all, this is a very vast subject, so probably I'll just scratch about a few areas just to give a sense. But first, let's look from a timeline perspective, right? One dimension is the timeline. And in timeline, if you look at it, where did it all start? This started late 22. From an enterprise standpoint, to be honest, they started somewhere mid 23. And from 23 today in 25, roughly around 2.5 years, we are talking about. This is one technology that has seen an adoption. And you would have seen the reports on state of AI that McKinsey publishes. You will see that this is the only technology ever in the history of all technologies we have had. In 2 years, it has touched greater than 70% of all top organizations having implemented at least in one function. Obviously, it's not enterprise-wide, etc. But if you compare it with even with AI to just grow 2 times its original, I think 16-17% adoption took the AI just 7-8 years, right? And we are talking about technology in just 2 year time span. So what has happened in this very short time span? And from an India market context, because that's where I work in the trenches, I think the first wave of functions that have adopted generative AI has been, and the tipping point from an enterprise standpoint has been IT. And while in the IT we keep talking a lot about code generation and code refactoration, etc., which in my view is the glamorous part of IT, where I have seen my clients really adopt well and really save money and drive productivity as the manager of AI, which is the AMS of the world. Fundamentally, ability to triage tickets, do digital resolution for your users, do RCAs of problems, all driven by agentic flows in Gen AI. That was the first step. I think last year, a lot of companies went into production. In what I was also discussing in the panel was around assistants. And these assistants have ranged quite a lot. They have ranged from assistants by functions, which I typically call Ask X. So it is like ask sales, ask procurement, ask, let's say, maintenance, and so on and so forth, which are more of essentially assistants that are supposed to enable the individual within the function. So if I am a pharma specialist who has to walk into a doctor's chamber and I have a meeting for just 3 minutes and I need to do a pitch, I need a narrative that is generated. During the conversation, the doctor asked me a question about the molecule of the pharma that I am presenting. I am not that great doctor. I need to go and call the center. And the way the industry works, this rep comes out, he does a call to the centralized pool of expert doctors. They will typically respond back a day later. That guy never gets an appointment with the doctor again the next day. They will get it next month. So the fact that he stepped out and he could not answer that question cost him almost a month. And now with generative AI, he asks these kind of solutions in front of the doctor, he can actually ask. And these are models trained. And I will just caveat, these are not generic models, which are large language models. These are obviously trained on the enterprise data for the molecules that this pharma is making. You can query that, give the response, and come out of that. So from a business standpoint, these have huge impact because this crashes timelines. One of the functions you will see in generative AI where a lot of adoption is happening is in the back offices, procurement, finance, massive adoption. Productivity is ranging from 30 to 50% in terms of that time reductions, quick ROIs, etc. Right? That's where the big play has happened. Now, what's emerging this year, and that's what is getting everybody more excited, and was also a recurring theme in our discussion today that happened, was agents. And why is agents becoming so important? Look, the way organizations look, and we have discussed that, is that it has to add up to some value for the enterprise. In financial terms, either it has to increase my revenue, it has to decrease my cost. And our early journey in this whole Gen AI has taught us that whenever we have done these point solutions with assistants, while it's been a wow for that problem to be solved, has not necessarily added up to a tangible value that the organization could see in actual terms. That, okay, in my bottom line, I actually added a percent. It didn't show. And that is happening because the value creation happens when you actually attack an area end to end and transform it. Mm-hmm. For example, if you are transforming complete procurement area, starting from source to pay, you are infusing completely reimagining the process and then applying an agentic flow, whether it is for buyer cockpit, whether it is operational procurement, or whether it is actually invoice payments or doing contract validation using four-way match. Doesn't matter, but fundamentally, you are reorchestrating the entire area. That's where the big dollar savings or dollar value addition is reflecting for them, right? And that's really why people are so excited with agentic. I think it's somewhere, some path to go forward, but that's what keeps me excited right now.
So that's truly wonderful. I mean, one of my managers had said a similar thing where he said that don't just try to blindly implement technology, but try to see what's the business problem or the business. You spoke about value creating activities. What sort of business value you can create and how technology can fit out there.
Yeah.
And I feel to a certain extent, as you had mentioned before in our conversation, that how thinking from a consultant's point of view, not just the solution aspect, but reimagining the whole process. Like think about lay out the whole process and then reimagine it, and that's what brings the big
Absolutely.
dollar savings.
Absolutely.
So that's really a wonderful take, sir. But on a more personal front, I have one cynical view about AI and Gen AI, which I would love your take on, and that's more along the lines of earlier what used to happen. What happens is calculators, computers, they were all built to improve our efficiency. But one of the things that remained unique to humans is our critical thinking ability.
Yeah.
Now I've been using ChatGPT and Gen AI agents for the past couple of years, but what happened is with GPT was still better when you made the shots and you used to type in your prompts. But with generative AI, you have them also calling the shots. So on a more personal front, how can one practice, also critical thinking abilities? Because when we're, say, going through our MBA classes, people tend to use AI in schools, classes, right? So on a more personal front, how do you think, what would be the right practices of using an AI? What are the...
Yeah. So this is like any other, honestly, evolution of technology that has happened before this, and I don't see this any differently. Look, when you are in the building phase or learning phase, and if you're using a toolkit to surpass essentially that entire mental stimulation was supposed to go through and didn't happen, obviously there's a issue there, and honestly I don't have a right answer. And I know there are universities who are actually putting a lot of protocols. If you use Gen AI, it can today be very
but we also have to use it because we need to know how to think with it, because that's...
So I'm coming to that, but it is not that the mental capacity is diminished or the thinking is eliminated when you collaborate with AI, right? And I think earlier when I was saying that we need to stop using generative AI toolkits like Google search and understand how to collaborate and what I meant by that. So let me give you an actual example just to make this little real, right? In my position, I do have the privilege, because a lot of startups do come and take advice from me and they show what they are working on. And I will not name one of this, but essentially he's applied for a patent and he was showing me what he's doing. Now, what's the evolved approach for this going forward, right? And when I say work collaboratively with AI, what does it really mean? So let's imagine the example I was giving you in consulting, and let's stay with the same example. That you have to analyze a process, and let's take with the same example, let's say procurement, and you have to analyze that process, formulate what's the to be state, and you have to define an agentic approach for that process, which means you will reimagine the process, saying that all these processes are not going to be relevant in an agentic way of working. I'll have this 9 agents working across this process, and this is the 40% reduction in that time I'll do around the process. Let's say that's the entire scope of the work you are doing, right? So what this toolkit that he's developed does is that if you say this is the industry, since you are from FSS, and in financial services, procurement is very different from industrial, right? It's more indirect procurement that happens in financial. So if you say in financial services, in city, I want to transform this process, the toolkit, which is an agentic toolkit, actually in its repository already has set of processes. There's obviously generic benchmark processes for in FSS and procurement. What would be a typical process? So it will lay out a typical process. You work with that process and refine it based on the nuances of your organization. And then you ask it that, okay, now create a version which is the agentic, and it will then create an agentic version saying all these processes don't need, all this need to be rerouted. These are the 10 agents that can be added to. And it's all doing on the fly with you. I think where I thought the whole thinking was brilliant, in this whole schema of things, what the startup has done is they have now introduced, now that this is all done at some stage of maturity, they introduce the agent, which is, let's say, a procurement expert in banking. So it's a virtual agent which pops into the chat, who is a procurement expert in banking. And that guy is now reviewing what you and the agent have developed so far and making corrections, suggesting, etc. And it's a real collaboration, almost like you're working with two humans in that whole journey. The reason I wanted to give you this example is that I think some discussions are now happening in terms of, are we outsourcing our thinking also? People are okay with the fact that you are outsourcing or eliminating execution. I think people are more uncomfortable with the thought that as humans, we will outsource our thinking. My limited point on that is that no, that's not the case. It's only a far more evolved, far more mature thinking. Because you as a young consultant would have just scratched 3 boxes to start with if you have not known procurement process. Today, through this toolkit, your starting position is a very evolved, mature state, and on which you are now iterating and ideating with a bot or an agent who is supposedly industry expert in banking for procurement process. Right? So I think a very long answer, but I just wanted to use an example to make the point that it is not that we are outsourcing thinking. I think the nature of thinking is going to be far evolved when you are working with agents in future.
Right. That really does, calm my qualms about AI, because often I try to, refrain myself, because I'm like, let me think more over here before I take a step forward. But yeah, I think that's true. We need to, as you mentioned, we have to redefine the entire process. We need to redefine the process of thinking itself, and that's what will change. So you've had I would like to come to a last segment where we have something to take away as business students. Business, as we have discussed in our panel discussion also before, it's about creating value, and as long as we are doing that, it's something which is fundamental.
Yeah.
But there are a few other fundamentals of thinking, of work, which will always stay true to the industry, right? It might be thinking like how to devise a strategy, what is the execution. Those are some things which if you develop a skill in that, no one can replace you. You don't have to fear AI or anything of that sort. So you have had a very diverse and rich experience, starting from chemical manufacturing to ITC, which is FMCG, and then you're now at IBM. So what are few of the key takeaways which you would say would be fundamental for a young aspiring professional such as ourselves and our audience?
So on this, we used to have something what we used to call T-shaped consultants, right? And you can research this. It was actually first propagated by, I think, a Harvard research paper, and then obviously adopted by a lot of consulting companies, IBM being one of them. I think that T-shaped consult, what did it really mean? The T-shaped consultant meant that any consultant has to, and I think this was also discussed today, has to be known for something. I think that's very important in consulting. What's your core? You cannot just be a generalist, right? So your core essentially can be, let's say, I am a sales expert or I am certain industry expert, etc. So there is some core that you will formulate for yourself. So fundamental thesis of T-shaped consultant is that whatever you are known for example, my journey initially was as an operations and supply chain consultant. That was my claim to fame. Any optimization or supply chain, how complex, would always land with me. Now everybody has to be known with something, right? And that in a T-shaped model is the entire pillar of T, right? The horizontal in a consulting base means that while you will be deep into something, and you need to be really deep into something, you need to have a breadth as a management consultant to understand what it means in the larger ecosystem. So great, you are a finance transformation consultant, but to say I only understand finance and I don't understand what's the implication of sales on finance does not cut ice, right? So that's one very important dimension, that a T-shaped consultant, you need to be deep in something, but you need to have some understanding of what influences my area. The other two areas that I think are important are, I think, has evolved. One, I think very importantly, I think I'm not going to talk about hygiene, like you have to have analytical skills. These are some hygiene stuffs with any consulting. I think the second most important thing is your ability to tell stories. And many people falter on that. I think consulting is not just about what is right, what is wrong. Many people know that. Consulting is also about how to convince people by telling a compelling story. And that ability to tell stories is a skill that some come with, but most learn. And there is an absolute science in any consulting company of how to tell stories. It's almost A, B, C, D, and you have to invest time and effort to understand that science and start telling stories with that. And third, which I think we have discussed enough, I will not repeat. I think as consultants, you need to stop fearing technology and AI. I think there is no running away from it. The sooner you adopt, the better you and faster you grow in your career.
Thank you, sir. So I love the T-shaped analogy you gave, the framework that you have given, because that's something which we are also taught in our operations. While you tend to specialize in one area, you also have to be willing to borrow ideas from another.
Yeah.
And that's what the horizontal, it creates awareness. And we were given an example on how Henry Ford was inspired by a butcher shop to create the assembly line. So that's one. And yes, sir. I mean, even in terms of fearing technology, I think it's all about adapting to the new age. So I think that's wonderful that you've shared these insights with us. So it's been an incredible conversation, Mr. Basu, and we love to hear your insights, and it was great talking with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Great to be here, Jitin.
Thank you.
Thank you.